Welcome. Today we're talking with Bo Backerman. He is a director at Bridgeforce, specializing in regulatory compliance, regulatory exam prep, and risk management and control. Bo, welcome, and thank you for joining us at Credit Union Digest.
Larry, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks to Credit Union Digest for having me.
Great. Well, good. All right. So, Bo, let's start with what's the compliance landscape for a credit union today?
Yeah, so number one, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, kind of also known as the CFPB, as well as the NCUA ones, take on supervision authority for credit unions with assets over $10 billion. Additionally, the NCUA ones are more thorough and comprehensive than the NCUA examination teams for credit unions under $10 billion. However, the NCUA is well on its way to increasing the threshold for NCUA 1 supervision to $15 billion in assets. I will also point out, Larry, that some of the potential good news from the CFPB is that on April 27th of this year, CFPB Director Rohit Chopra stated to the House Committee on Financial Services that, and I'm quoting, that the CFPB is shifting enforcement resources away from investigating small firms and instead focusing on repeat offenders and large players engaged in large-scale harm. For initial CFPB examinations, once you cross that $10 billion threshold, the starting point is almost always compliance management review. This is an examination of the compliance management environment, which the CFPB calls the compliance management system. From a starting point of beyond looking at the compliance management system, the area of deposits for credit unions seems to be trending to be the default go-to initial business examination area. Also, what I'll point out, Larry, is that portfolio composition is a key driver of examination area decision-making, because the CFPB is focused on where there is the potential for the most consumer harm. Great.
Wow. I mean, it's an interesting shift there by the Bureau. So thank you for that. So, you know, in kind of thinking about that, you know, credit unions that are kind of approaching that asset level, you know, maybe they're at 6-7 billion now and have expectations of continued growth. And what should they be doing to prepare and start thinking about being ready for that CFPB audit review, compliance, et cetera? And also, how do compliance expectations change as the credit union grows beyond that current $10 billion threshold?
Wonderful questions, Larry. And you know, one of the things that, you know, I could say sort of at the highest levels that the CFPB has defined 4 pillars of a compliance management system.
Okay.
In the work that we have done, Bridgeforce has mapped 98 requirements and expectations across those pillars. But I will just hit some key highlights because we don't have 2 hours to run through sort of all 98 of the assessment areas. So pillar 1 is board of directors and management oversight. And that includes clear compliance expectations. They often refer to tone from the top, and performance management that includes regulatory adherence. There's also board and supervisory committee regulation specific training that is expected and part of that pillar. In addition, clear policies that are communicated internally as well as to service providers as part of a vendor management regime. And finally, appropriate compliance staffing and resources across all 3 lines of defense. And by 3 lines of defense, the first line of defense is your business or functional areas. Second line would be your compliance department. Third line would be audit. It could be internal audit, or you may be using a third party. The second pillar is the compliance program, and that includes policies, procedures, and processes, and the delineation of controls that are part of the compliance department, as well as those that are embedded in the business line.
Mhm.
There's expectations for training that is supposed to be comprehensive and role-based.
Sure.
Compliance monitoring, which is to be comprehensive but periodic and risk-based.
Mhm.
And corrective action, which would be issues management and associated appropriate governance and reporting.
Right.
A new information technology examination module was introduced in late 2021
Mhm.
as part of a CMS assessment and as part of the examination manual from the CFPB. And the stated objective is to assess an institution's and its service providers, third parties, IT controls.
Okay.
And not a lot of is really known about that at this point. The language is a little bit vague, and the examinations in those areas are just now starting. So Bridgeforce will be following along very closely as the CFPB issues supervisory guidance and supervisory bulletins and supervisory updates
Right.
around what they are seeing in this new area of a CMS technology related exam.
Right. Right.
The third pillar is complaints management. And the expectation there is for comprehensive definitions, procedures, and tracking, monitoring of things like complaint rates, trends, and aberrations to acceptable levels of complaint rate, root cause analysis of similar types of complaints with high risk that then lead to and result in change to business practices.
Okay.
And then the final pillar is independent risk-based audit. And that includes comprehensive regulation applicability, policies and procedures, transaction and control auditing, corrective action tracking, and completion timeliness, as well as corrective action validation. Your final question that you had here was about how expectations change as credit unions grow.
Right.
And the CFPB will conduct examinations far more frequently in greater detail and become highly focused on pockets of potential risk concern and the thoughtful risk-based evolution of the compliance management realm.
Great. Great. Well, thank you, Bo. The four pillars really makes like a really great structure to understand this with. So, you know, given what you've described here, how does the credit union, how do they stay ahead of the curve with compliance and not feel like they're always playing catch up?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, it certainly requires an awful lot of planning. Typically, credit unions are under-resourced in the compliance space. That includes both headcount as well as having the appropriate types of compliance management related technology and systems,
Right.
as well as the institution of a robust change management program where the compliance department and other compliance subject matter experts, such as those who reside within the business lines or functional areas themselves,
Right.
have a seat at the table and must sign off on all changes.
Right.
I'll also say that, you know, in Bridgeforce's experience, development of a CFPB expected baseline compliance management system typically takes 2 to 3 years due to the need to design the program, get approval for headcount and systems resources,
Right.
and embark upon an appropriate development of procedures that are regulator friendly. I cannot emphasize this last point enough about procedures, because often when a credit union or other financial institution is asked for their procedures in an initial CFPB exam,
Right.
what typically gets provided are desktop procedures, which are highly detailed, almost step-by-step instructions for staff members.
Right.
But what is really needed are plain English, call it prose, operating procedures that provide enough information and detail for examiners to understand the relevant topic,
Right.
including associated controls, as well as ties to specific regulation requirements.
Right. Right.
Finally, what I'll say is that it is essential to have a well-defined roadmap to share with the regulators about the journey where you have been, where you currently are, and where you are focusing a continuous improvement compliance management journey.
Right.
The CFPB and the NCUA ones are remarkably appreciative of transparency. And this is another point which I cannot emphasize enough, because traditionally, often the view towards responding to regulators is only share what they ask for, as opposed to having a more open dialogue about your self-awareness of the evolution of your compliance management environment.
Right. Right. Great. Thank you, Bo. All good points. Really great. Personally, I have a much better understanding of how, with planning, expert guidance, and insights, credit unions can prepare to meet the change in compliance expectations as they grow. It's evolving. It's becoming more system, technology driven, et cetera. So thank you for sharing your perspectives with Credit Union Digest.
Well, thank you, Larry, and thanks to Credit Union Digest. It was my pleasure to join you.
Good, good. So in closing, thank you for joining Credit Union Digest. If you have additional questions for Bo, please see the link in his bio.